Bosch Security Escort, Setup, Receiver Configuration. In receiver configuration is super helpful if you're a installer installing the system by yourself. The purpose for this is to use an installer's transmitter, which is a red transmitter. At this point you go ahead and you select what transponder, in this case I only have one, what bus and point, which is the receiver that we're going to start with, and then you put this receiver in setup mode. At this point, the receiver has a red and green LED turned on. You would take your blueprints on where that receiver should be installed. You would go to that location. If you see the two lights, then you know that that was installed in the correct place. You would then go ahead and produce a test on a transmitter, the installer transmitter. The receiver will beep, the lights will flash, and then the lights will turn off, and then the next receiver in the list will turn on. This will identify that that receiver is connected to the system, can communicate to the system, and that you should move on to the next receiver. You would then theoretically go through the entire system, identifying that each receiver was installed in the correct location and that it's working back to the head-end system. At any point you can stop this by hitting abort. Bosch Security Escort, Setup, System Preferences. In system preferences, there's a lot of things that change how the system operates. Everything in here has a definition in the reference manual located online. To give you a brief summary of the groups of what's going on here is this section here, buddy check, run buddy check, and high-speed buddy check have to do with receivers communicating to one another to make sure that everything is communicating correctly. The next three squares have to do with engineering and maintenance and logging things into background processes. Pager communications is required if you're using pagers. Modem communications will probably never be checked because nobody uses modem communications for anything anymore. Sound nearest receiver is one of the newest options. The purpose for sound nearest receiver is if you leave the sounders on in the system and you have an alarm, you don't want 60 or 20 receivers going off at a time because the alarm was sounded. You want only the receiver closest to the alarm to go off. Over here is the no password on reentry, or no password timeout. This has to do with how often somebody has to put in a passcode when operating the system, or if they have to put in a passcode to exit the system. This is all done for logging purposes. Bring alarm to front window allows you to run the security escort in the background, and it brings it to the front when there's an alarm. That also is in correlation with not always top window. Bring to front on trouble is the same thing as bring to front on alarm, except in a trouble condition. The control room output, siren, strobe, spare, output 1, output 2. This is kind of split between transponder database and a coordinator system. Force map background erase was due to graphic issues in older PCs. May be applicable nowadays. Don't usually check that. Enable algorithm tweaks. What this does is allows a lot of different settings to happen. Alright, when you have this checked and you hit save and you go back into setup and system preferences, you'll see that you have map scale, alarm spot size, linear depth, low depth, medium depth, and strong depth. The map scale is just that. Currently, you're looking at the map at 100%. If I change it to 125, it increases the size of my map. It also increases the size of the map and changes the XY coordination of the receivers accordingly to that map size. Let's go ahead and change that back to 100. Alarm spot size is how big the alarm dot is when in an alarm condition. Remember that the alarm dot should equal 40 feet, a 20-foot radius from the center of the dot, so this is important when scaling your map to the alarm dot to make sure that the relation is correct. Two of the last two things, and probably the more important thing, is the ID receiver. The ID receiver is very important because not all transmitters have a transmitter ID located on them or on the packaging. Because of this, you select the transponder that's closest to where you're going to enroll transmitters, and then the point number. And the point number is what bus number and what address the receiver is on that bus. In this case, I'm going to select 00. Bosch Security Escort. Setup. Alarm zones. Alarm zones is how you segregate the alarms by computer. And what I mean by computer is by master, by slave, or by workstation. Because I am a master computer currently, as indicated in the upper left-hand corner, all of this is grayed out as the master computer has to receive all signals, period. But if I were under setup, remote setup, and change this to a workstation computer, then under setup and alarm zones, I can then segregate what alarms come to this computer. If I want to only get alarm zone 1 computers, then I uncheck everything else and only select alarm zone 1. You can also narrow this down even further by selecting what alarm group you want to see. This is in correlation to under the subscriber database, the alarm zone here. This is the same alarm zone 1, 2, 3, 4 that is used in the segregation of alarms under alarm zone and system preferences, or under alarm zones under setup. Bosch Security Escort. Setup. Transponder comport setup. In transponder comport setup, this is where you tie physical comports to a comport index. This is helpful if you have a comport, if you change a comport, if you change this to a different computer, so that you can select a different comport for that index to use to communicate with the hardware. So, as you can tell, it's index A through L, and then comport 1 through 16. Unfortunately, we don't have the option to put in your own comport, so you are limited to comport 1 through 16. Bosch Security Escort. Setup. Remote comport setup. So, remote comport setup is similar to transponder setup, transponder comport setup, except it's specifically for network, modem, system serial 1 and 2. Now, network port and modem port are not used anymore, as nobody uses a serial network or a modem to communicate to transponders anymore. System serial port 1 or 2 are still relevant, as that is how you would communicate to a third-party hardware software system to send them serial strings to do like camera call-up or to integrate however they want with a custom serial string. Down here you can see that you can select the baud rate, unlike the transponder comport setup, which you cannot. Bosch Security Escort. Setup. Remote setup. In remote setup, in the upper left-hand corner, you have computer mode. Computer mode allows you to identify if this computer is a master computer, a slave computer, which is a clone of the master computer, or a workstation computer. In the bottom left-hand corner, under modem access setup, is no longer used. In the upper right corner, you have system serial port. This is where you would identify if you want your history to go out the serial port, if you have a third-party or hardware system that you're going to integrate with, if you are going to use the security Escort protocol to integrate with a third-party or hardware system, if you're going to have this attached to a pager system to send out pages. Under serial output restore is the reset command for any serial strings sent during an alarm condition to pull up cameras or to interface with a third-party hardware or software. So again, this is the reset command for the activation commands, which we'll talk about at a later point.